Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party. It is undeniable that time is relative because 2020 has felt simultaneously like the longest and shortest year, and that time has stood still during lockdown. I was shocked and stunned to find it is already July, which means we are already halfway through the year, but at the same point, time is stretching away from us as the date for reopening cinemas and Tenet seem to get closer and yet further away. Now, 2020 may be a year that many will want to forget, but on today's show, we're designed to look back and bring you our favourite films of the year so far. Well, from a very small pool of films which were released in 2020 anyway. I'm your co-host Dallas King, and with me as always is the Siskel to my Ebert, the Statler to my Waldorf. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Yeah, really good. I realised today it's been 4 months of working from home and sort of lockdown, so that's a landmark, I guess. When I was sitting there at the start going, I'm going to blitz all these films in a couple of weeks, get through, and then it's back to normality. Sorely misjudged.
Yeah, we've now been on lockdown and away from cinemas longer than we have been at cinemas in 2020. And yeah, that saddens me. I really want to get back there. But, hopefully we'll, given the short period of time we were able to get into cinemas, it might be a case that more of the films in our top 10s are ones which we've actually seen at home. But I guess we're going to find out, because normally when I do one of these top 10s, I like to stick to a rigid set of rules of films which are only released in the UK, in cinemas, during that year, that calendar year. And Lee normally decides to scrap that entire rule and go by films which he's watched in that year. So it's fair to say that probably a lot of films which are on his 2019 list might be appearing on my 2020 list, which means, has Lee actually watched anything that he's able to put on his list this year? I guess we're going to find out. So the rule was basically, we're going to give you our top 10 films, we're going to give you our numbers 6 to 10 in just a list, and then we're going to dive a bit more into our top 5 and justify why we have chosen those ones. So Lee, are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you find it difficult to make a list of 10 films which you A, have seen, and B, enjoyed in 2020?
It wasn't difficult to make a list of films that I had seen, but I was incredibly handicapped by sort of my decisions. So in terms of like my 2019 list, for if people can remember it, would be that it would count if it had like a theatrical release. So in terms of, say, they shoved Star Wars into the cinema again, that doesn't count. But if I went to see a film like, say, Parasite, for example, had a UK kind of release this year, but it was shown as part of the Screen Unseen season last year at the Odeon, or something like The Lighthouse, which had a UK release in sort of the London Film Festival, but then had a release kind of in 2020. So that would kind of justify the count for me if it was at festivals or had the opportunity to see it. So that was kind of the way my list went, but a lot of my top 25 of last year were probably what many people would class as some of their best films of 2020. So that was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, so at least it'll give us a point of difference on these ones, because I'm not going to give the game away, but I think several will be on my list. So yeah, we shall see. So do you want to run us from your 10 to 6 of 2020?
So I'll do my top 10, but I will also give you some of the caveats that made the top 25 in case people wonder why that didn't make it. So in the sort of underneath...
Yes. That discussion of, why didn't you include this film? Or, what, you're mad. What, you should have seen this one. I say, well, I did see it, but I just didn't think it. It's all personal taste, folks. You can shout at us on Twitter if you want, but these are the films that we have enjoyed and like best. So
exactly. So in sort of between 11 and 25, there's films like Scott Graham's Run, which came out this year, Our Ladies, which showed at sort of the Glasgow Film Festival, and it is due to sort of screen later this year. Saint Maud, it's kind of was due to be in America this week. It's been sort of delayed till later in the year. The Vast of Night, a film that I didn't anticipate taking the sort of world by storm on Amazon Prime. Ema, the fantastic film that maybe picked up this year, those all sort of were popped in sort of the second half of my list. But my top 10 from last year, so Burning, 2019 outright, The Farewell, the same, Marriage Story, the same, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the same. Then we start to get to things like Parasite, that counted for last year, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, yeah, that was another 2020 sort of global release. Waves, that was the same. Her Smell, the only film in the top 3 to have been a genuine out-and-out 2019 kind of film in the UK. Then we get to Uncut Gems, which came out here on Netflix in, I think, February, and the same with The Lighthouse. So, yeah, a lot of big hitters have been ruled out of my best of 2020 so far.
Cool. Yeah, no, it is very difficult. You know, there's I'm going to put the proviso that there's 2 films which I would have put in my top 10 if they had gotten a full release. I saw Promising Young Woman, not actually Promising Young Woman, at the Glasgow Film Festival. It was a surprise film, and it was due to come out in April, but obviously that release was cancelled, and at the moment it has no subsequent release date. And then, like you say, Saint Maud would easily be in my top 5 of the year. I first saw it at the London Film Festival, it then screened at the Glasgow Film Festival and was due for a May release, but it's been pushed back to October, so it will eventually appear in my top 10 list once it gets released. But those 2 were just on the outskirts, but because I'm a stickler to the rules, that's why they're just film adjacent to the list, I would say. So do you want to give us your 10, 9, 8, 7 and 6?
Yeah, so I've gone with at 10 The Assistant, 9 Women Make Film, 8 Shirley, 7 The Beastie Boys Story, and at 6 Da 5 Bloods.
Nice. Shirley is a film which I have on my iTunes account ready to watch. I really should have actually tried to watch it before this because, yeah, at the moment we're basically, because cinemas are closed, I'm counting anything which has received I'm breaking my own rules and going by a UK or US cinema or VOD release. So that's what I'm basically having to go. I just hate having to do that, but that is the way. I can't get to a cinema, so I've got to make exceptions. But my 10 are The Personal History of David Copperfield, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Da 5 Bloods as well, Weathering with You, and at number 6 is Scott Graham's Run, which we are huge fans of, and unfortunately we're unable to bring you the DVD commentary that we were going to do because we were going to watch it on a streaming service and then do a commentary, but it turns out the streaming service did not have subtitles, so we're waiting for Lee to get the DVD which he won in a competition once they're off furlough and back in the office, to send that up to him, and then at some point, hopefully over the next few months, we might be able to bless you with our thoughts of Fast and Furious and Fraser.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. It's great to know that I've got a prize coming down the line for my enjoyment of that film.
Physical media for the win. It beats streaming and all that because, it didn't have subtitles. And, not knocking it, but, for a film set in the Broch in the northeast of Scotland where accents are on the strong side, I think subtitles might be necessary in certain parts of the world. So, Lee, are you gonna what did you pick? What's made your top 5 of this year? What are you gonna go starting at number 5?
So I've gone for my number 5, and it just dropped sort of in the UK last year. So I did see it last year, but by default it didn't make the top 25. It had just missed out, and that is Corey Fineland's follow-up to Thoroughbred's Bad Education. So it's starring Hugh Jackman as Dr. Frank Toussaint. He's a superintendent of this American high school in Long Island, which is seeing unprecedented success. More than anything in the world. I think it's like the 4th ranked best public school in the country under his watch. But a young pupil discovers that everything is not as well as it seems. And this is like a school story kind of distilled down. Like, it takes all that we're seeing in the world today, corruption, misuse of public funds, and sort of boils it down to sort of this macro school level. And it's, we see fantastic journalism. We kind of dive into sort of corruption, the politics of it all, gay rights and drama. It's one of the sort of film that seems to combine so many different elements, and it's one of these films that I think worked out for the best. I mean, HBO brought up the rights in America. Obviously, its relationship here means that it came on to sort of Sky Movies. There was a lot of people going, "Oh, this film should have got a cinema release. Should have got a cinema release." It seems that they managed to, foresee things and cut out the middleman. So yeah, Bad Education features a fantastic performance from Hugh Jackman in his leading role, and probably one of his best kind of performances, I would say.
Yeah, no, this is a film which initially I was not, prioritising to see at the London Film Festival. I hadn't seen Thoroughbreds by that point. I finally caught up with it during lockdown on Netflix and was very impressed with that one. But this one, I think I managed to get a free ticket to the subsequent non-gala screening, and I was really impressed with it. It was, like I say, it's the one of the great things about this film is it's about, the comeuppance that this guy gets, and it's all his own doing, because it starts off with like this pupil interviewing for the school paper, and he sort of basically encourages her with her journalism, saying, don't write a puff piece, write a proper story. And basically that causes her to then start digging into the accounts of the school and then discovering all this corruption and stuff like that. But I mean, like you say, this is one of Hugh Jackman's best performances. Hugh Jackman, I think, is a very underrated actor. Most, if you were to talk to the large sort of swathe of audiences, most people would probably be familiar with him with Wolverine and also sort of Great Showman. So he's very much like a superhero or a song and dance man, but he's proven in the likes of The Prestige and The Fountain that he can actually, and Prisoners as well, that he can really act when he needs to. And this is, like you say, one of his best performances. I know what they were saying about the sort of cinema release, because I think there was talk that his performance was that strong that he could have maybe potentially got a nomination out of it. I wonder if he's eligible for the Emmys if it's out on HBO. I don't know, but I think it's Sky Cinema over here in the UK. I think it dropped in the last week or so. So I think people in the UK are finding it now as well. But yeah, no, it was a very, very good film. And, it's Hugh Jackman's great in it, but it's also a great film beyond that, and got great support with the likes of Alison Janney and stuff like that as well.
So what have you gone with for your number 5 then?
Number 5, I've gone with one of two films on the list, which are perfect for lockdown, and it is Portrait of a Lady on Fire by Celine Sciamma, and this is one of the best sort of love stories of the year. Again, it's a film which technically I saw in 2019, but didn't get a release until 2020, and it is about the story of an artist who goes to a remote island to paint a woman for a marriage portrait so that she can get married to an Italian monarch. And during the course of sort of around about a week that she spends on the island trying to coax her into doing this, oh, by the way, she's got to do it surreptitiously. She's not willing to pose for the photo, so her mum has to get her to try and basically become her confidant, and then she's got to kind of look at her and then go off in secret and draw this portrait of it. And it's about the two of them sort of striking up a friendship, which turns into something more. And it's just one of the most sort of beautiful, sort of tender sort of films. It's very sort of similar in many respects to 2017 sort of Call Me By Your Name, to the point that I think I dubbed it Paint Me By Your Numbers. The final shot and stuff is very similar to Call Me By Your Name and things like that, but it's one of the most sort of beautiful romances, and yeah, it's just an exquisite piece of filmmaking, and it's one which did manage to thankfully find a bit of an audience, and it came out sort of in tail end of February, but I think did very well on Curzon Home Cinema as well. So I think this was this one on your list for last year?
Yeah, it hit top 5. It was in the 5th spot as well. So yeah, this was a fantastic release for kind of people. I think it kind of came at sort of the right time as well. It got that brief cinema release sort of here, and I think that kind of good wave and kind of popularity in terms of reviews really helped a lot of people find it at the start of lockdown, with kind of films sort of trickling out more than sort of flooding at that point. So I think this film kind of, thanks to sort of the lockdown in a way, managed to find a larger audience, and it certainly seemed like on my social media feeds that it was certainly one of the most popular films of lockdown. I mean, the performances from Adele Haenel and Naomi Merlant and sort of the leading roles were just absolutely stunning. So I was lucky enough to see it in the cinema, and it was going to be probably the last film I saw just before lockdown. I kind of wanted to go and see it again in sort of the cinema. Unfortunately, that was denied to me, but I got the chance to see it again on Mubi, which was fantastic. And now, because of their library access, anyone can sort of tune in anytime and watch that film, which is a fantastic treat.
Oh yeah, no, this film was one of the reasons that I got Mubi. I did have a free trial last year, which it ran out, but it was one of the reasons which I now pay to access it. So yeah, no, it's great, and yeah, like you say, they've added basically their full back catalogue of all the films which they've previously gone. So if you're looking for a streaming service which offers something a little bit different, then we can heartily recommend Mubi, and of course Portrait of a Lady on Fire, because we both had it at number 5, just in different years. So what have you picked as your number 4?
Yeah, this was a film that if anyone had asked me at the start of January or February if I even knew this film was going to be released, I would have kind of been completely surprised. And that is Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man at number 4. So I think everyone's now seen this film probably in lockdown, but for those who haven't seen it, when Cecilia, played by Elizabeth Moss's abusive ex, takes her own life and leaves her a fortune, she suspects his death was a hoax. As a series of coincidences turn lethal, Cecilia works to prove that she is being haunted by someone that nobody can see. So the last I remembered sort of hearing about The Invisible Man was when I think it was sort of Johnny Depp was due to play it sort of in this kind of fated dark universe, which is a discussion in itself for one day. And I never realised, I'd heard kind of murmurings about this sort of Invisible Man film coming out at the start of the year, and I wasn't really paying much attention to it. Like, I'm a bit hit or miss on sort of the Blumhouse kind of films. I'll try and see some of them, but I don't keep up to date, religiously with their output. And then sort of like, oh, Elizabeth Moss, okay, yeah, she picks good films by and large. Okay, yeah, I'm open to this. And then sort of there was the flood of positive kind of reviews and, critical acclaim. And I was like, right, this film is more than earned my attention. I was going to see it anyway, but I'll be definitely there sort of opening weekend. So yeah, I caught this one in the cinema, and what a treat it was to watch a film like this with a crowd. This one is full of shocks and surprises, and I think that it gives it a really thoroughly modern twist by, the Invisible Man is a gaslighting, terrible, abusive boyfriend. And I think the way that it ties itself into sort of a modern issue is what horror sometimes does at its absolute best. And when it's kind of lacking, it can be quite generic. And I thought The Invisible Man was fantastic, and Moss's performance made it easily one of the best films of the year. Would the film rank this high if life had gone normal this year? I'm not too sure, but I can't dispute that it's probably one of the best films I've seen this year.
It's also one of the best films I've seen this year, and I've actually got it at number 3, but we might as well continue talking about it now since you brought it up. For me, this was, like you say, it was one of those films which I wasn't really, it was on my radar, but I wasn't, prioritising. I think it was coming out around about, I think it was the same time as the Glasgow Film Festival, but on the strength of like some really sort of strong reviews coming out of the States and stuff like that, I actually had to prioritise, I think like one of the first days I was down, to basically sack off a press screening of something in order to make sure I caught a regular screening of this, and this film just blew me away. I mean, Elizabeth Moss, like I say, is fantastic. Her Smell is a film which I still have not seen, but I know you rate it very highly, so I do need to catch that during lockdown, but fantastic and likes it, like The Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that. And for fans of The Handmaid's Tale, you will not be disappointed, because there is indeed a shot where basically Elizabeth Moss looks very pissed off while looking at the screen before a needle drop of a music track drops in. And yeah, she was great. The twist that they put on it by, like you say, having this sort of gaslighting villain, and all being more about, the mental health issue of this woman, sort of not really knowing whether or not he's actually existing or not. It's a really fascinating take. The scares that are sort of put in there, a couple were in the trailer, but they still had a lot of punch in the cinema as well. There's one moment in a restaurant which just killed my audience, and is one of the reasons why I want to get back into a cinema, to have that sort of communal experience of, you couldn't believe what you were seeing. It was just an incredibly shocking moment, and it just played so well. And I've waxed lyrical in the past. I mean, I think we did an entire episode on The Invisible Man, and I talked about my love of Upgrade, so Leigh Whannell was always going to be a huge plus for me. And it turns out that he's been handed the keys to the Dark Universe Kingdom, and he's apparently in talks to direct a version of The Wolfman with Ryan Gosling in it, so I'm keen to see kind of what take he would put on that. I'm assuming it won't be as simple as just a man gets bitten by a wolf and turns into a werewolf every full moon. So very looking forward to seeing that. The Invisible Man is one which I really want to see again. I've ordered the Blu-ray now for the unseen cut, the extended edition, which apparently is exactly the same length as the regular cinema edition. So what the difference is, I don't know.
It's probably a headbutt, isn't it?
When Attack of the Clones got a 12A because of a headbutt or something like that. That was, or was it a PG, something like that? I remember that headbutt. And Spider-Man also got a higher rating because of a headbutt. You know, in Scotland, that's just a daily occurrence. I don't understand. But yeah, Invisible Man, yes, very, very well, highly rated, right, and definitely worth checking out. Easily the best horror film of the year so far. Touch wood. We'll see what happens later on. For me, number 4 was Parasite, which is Bong Joon-ho's look at how greed and class discrimination threaten the newly formed symbiotic relationship between the wealthy Park family and the destitute Kim clan. This was a film which everyone was raving about all the way back in Cannes 2019. It seems like everyone and their dog had seen this film before. I finally caught a preview about 2 days before it came out. Just before it won the Oscar for Best Picture, the first foreign language film to ever win Best Picture at the Oscars. And, you know, it seems like everything seemed to go wrong after that point. It was like such a great cathartic moment, and then everything started to go wrong. Although, at least it has to be said that in the UK, this became the highest grossing foreign language film, I think, of almost all time. I think it did over £10 million, which is... I think it was the first time since about 2004 that had happened, and it was easily the highest grossing foreign language film since The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, all the way back then. So crazy to think how popular it was. People finally woke up to watching some language subtitle films in the cinema, and now you can't watch anything in the cinema.
I would love to have known what the final total would have been that if it had continued its cinema run, what it would have got. I mean, I saw that today Curzon are going to be releasing in the next week or two the black and white edition into cinemas. So there's, you know, it could be potentially one of these choices. I think obviously in Scotland we've still got really no cinemas till the 31st of July, but you know, it looks like people in England will have the chance to see Parasite. Yeah,
I always love the phrase that, you know, I was almost doing inverted commas in cinemas. But yeah, will the black and white add anything to it? I know there's been a lot of discussion in one of our sort of Facebook chat groups about people not being convinced. You know, Mad Max Fury Road, did it need it? No. Logan, I thought worked quite well in black and white. So I've only seen Parasite the once, so I would be keen to see it again. So you know, if I'm looking for something to tempt me back into the cinema, that could be it. I know I'm going to prioritise Empire Strikes Back and Blade Runner, but if Tenet gets shifted again, then yeah, Parasite might make it back in for another one. But yeah, no, this was a fantastic piece of filmmaking. I've been a huge fan of his since Mother, The Host, Snowpiercer, Memories of a Murder, and yeah, it's amazing that it won so many awards but didn't really get many acting nominations, because the cast across the board is utterly fantastic. You think it's one type of film, and then something happens and it does not go the way you expect. I will just leave it at that, because there's a chance that some people still haven't seen it. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out in colour or in black and white, depending on what you can get access to. So there you go. So what is in your top 3? What's at your number 3?
Yeah, so my number 3 is a film that got its premiere at Sundance and is in cinemas this month in America, believe it or not, which I refuse to believe, but will be on Apple TV from August 14th, and that's Boy State, sort of the A24 Apple TV film. So for someone that is a total mark for American politics and coming of age stories, this seemed like the perfect kind of mix for me. So the film follows 1,000 teenage boys attending Boy State in Texas, coming together to build a representative government from the ground up, from all different political backgrounds, navigating challenges of organising political parties, consensus, and campaigning for the highest office at Boy State, governor. This is a film that, you know, I was really interested at the start of the year when I heard about this film. I was like, oh, that sounds like my cup of tea. I'd really like to see it. And then when I sort of heard that it was going to be going to Apple TV, it was part of this Apple TV A24 kind of joint partnership, I was even more curious. Then on top of that, the fact that they had spent $12 million, which is astronomical for an independent documentary at Sundance, made me think there's got to be something really special about this film that they're spending that kind of money on. And yeah, I got the chance to kind of watch it just a couple weeks ago, and it's really struck with me since. So it has so, I don't want to spoil it too much because obviously, you know, people are still to kind of see this out large. But this was a film that shocks and gives you a lot of bit of hope for the future. You know, we think of such partisan times right now in America, and you know, there's always this hope that, well, you know, the youth vote will help you see things through. We've got a really positive, proactive generation coming up that are going to really bring around positive change for American politics, and how can we get the youth involved. Watching this documentary makes me a little hesitant to see that kind of happen. You know, it maybe says something about Texas, it maybe says something about the youth of America, or kind of beyond that. It's hard to say, but this film was equal parts terrifying in terms of some of these young boys, kind of their thoughts on abortion, women's rights, gun control. You're listening to these people and you don't feel that they've got the strength of conviction in what they're saying. It can be quite terrifying to listen to. But then at the same time, you've got some really wonderful young boys that are kind of, you know, they're going to be stars of the future in politics or somewhere else, and I'm excited to see where their lives and career goes. So yeah, it's a documentary that I think will stick with people a hell of a lot, and it's probably worth your probably bigger investment in maybe an Apple TV 7-day package, or you know, a month subscription, more than perhaps the new Tom Hanks film, which seems to be getting a bit mixed reviews.
Yeah, no, thanks to you, I was able to catch a screener of this one as well. I hadn't seen the trailer or anything to it, and when it started, I got the feeling that this was going to go completely Lord of the Flies, and that once they sort of set the ball running and said, all right, here you're in these parties, the adults seemed to basically back off completely, and I thought it was all going to go horribly wrong. But it was actually interesting to see just, you know, the mix of people, and the fact that, you know, they're not Republicans and Democrats, they're sort of Federalists and Nationalists and stuff like that, and they have to create their own policies and stuff. And you've got the people sort of taking it very seriously who really want to be in a career in politics, and there's people sort of thinking they're auditioning to be leader of a frat house or something like that. So the sort of mix of characters is always something that makes for a good documentary. And yeah, it's like you say, it's equally parts terrifying and inspiring, and it's the kind of thing which I could see that if they did in the UK, you probably would have gone to when you were at school.
Yeah, I mean, the fellow podcaster on this network, Philip, who hosts Time and Space, I was like, Philip, surely you did Boys Day. I'd never heard of it. So I'm really desperate to speak with someone that went to a boys or a girls state. I was just blown away by the bloody logistics of how, like, they get thousands of kids together and get these things kind of up and running. It certainly puts, like, you know, Cubs and Scouts here in the UK to absolute shame, how they get thousands of people, you know, to kind of basically form a government in that time. Yeah, it's I'm looking forward to watching this one again. It was had so much going on.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's out, well, like you say, in cinemas in the UK, in the US. I think it's July 31st, and then on Apple TV from August 14th. So you don't have to wait too long to catch that one. I've already given you my number 3, which is The Invisible Man. So I guess I can go to my number 2, and it's my second lockdown film of the year, and it is Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, starring Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe as two lighthouse keepers, or wickies, who have to try and keep their sanity when they are stranded on board an island with a lighthouse for an indeterminate amount of time, with only each other and a seagull and a mermaid for company. And yeah, it's shot in black and white, and it's sort of in sort of the 1:19 aspect ratio, old school sort of filmmaking by Robert Eggers, and it is just the performances of Pattinson and Willem Dafoe together create just this thing. And it came out sort of in America and at the London Film Festival tail end of last year, and was released end of January, before lockdown was even really a mooted thing. And it just rewatching it this weekend for the A24 project, coming soon, and it is the perfect sort of lockdown film. It's also like the worst film you could watch during lockdown, but also the greatest film in the world as well, because yeah, it's nice to see who you identify with. I'm definitely a Winslow, not a Wake. So what about yourself?
Yeah, I rewatched that one. It was one of my sort of last films, sort of, you know, one of the few films I got the chance to see in the cinemas this year. So yeah, it was my number one film of last year, and I've kind of watched it a few times since. I saw it again in the cinemas in February, and I've kind of watched it another once or twice kind of since for sort of the podcast and my own enjoyment. And yeah, I still think it's just an incredible piece of work. And just, you know, we recently just finished recording it, so if anyone wants to hear kind of our further thoughts on that, definitely check out the next week's episode of the A24 Project. But yeah, that film is a masterpiece. And yeah, I haven't got around to kind of, you know, putting like a dog leash on someone and walking them around sort of my local park yet, but you know, another maybe 10 days in isolation and a couple more bottles of vodka and we could probably be looking at that.
Absolutely. So we're getting quite near the top 10. What have you got as your number 2 film of 2020?
So my number 2 is just released last week, sort of on VOD in America after a short spell in cinemas before the lockdown, and that's First Cow. A loner and a skilled cook have travelled west and joined a group of fur trappers in Oregon Territory. Though he only finds true connection with a Chinese immigrant also seeking his fortunes. Soon the two collaborate on a successful business, although its longevity is reliant upon the clandestine participation of a nearby wealthy landowner's prized milking cow. So this was a film, you know, in terms of First Cow, where there was quite that little bit of buzz about it at the start of the year. I really wasn't too sure what to expect from this cow. I mean, it is the titular kind of role. And I watched the trailer and I was like, well, that seems like my kind of cup of tea. Okay, I'm interested. And then when it got announced kind of about a few weeks ago that it was going to be kind of, the cinema run was going to be short, obviously, and it was just going to be sort of going on to VOD, I decided to sort of put up the $15 because I was like, I think I'm going to love this film. And that I did. I watched it on Friday night. I had, you know, house all to myself, you know, a bit of mood lighting, you know, a nice dinner, you know, a glass of wine, and I dived into this film and I was really struck by it. And I'm not going to play my hand too much in terms of what I really liked about it, because I know you've still to see it, and I think I don't want your experience to be tainted by it at all. But you know, the film starts in a very interesting way, and what happens in that first 5 minutes of the film you forget within seconds, because you're kind of caught up in sort of the tenderness of this film. It's an incredibly relaxing film, and it's sort of like, if The Lighthouse is your nightmare of what lockdown is, something like First Cow is kind of there to comfort you a little bit. You know, I didn't realise what my mental state was like until I was watching a bit where I was watching a man milk a cow and talk really calmly to it and get a little tear or two in my eyes. And the film is incredibly relaxing until it's not relaxing. So don't ever just think that you're going to be in a positive space the whole time watching this film. But yeah, this is a lovely film, and it shows what cinema can be. It's something that is just, you know, with Kelly Reichardt films, she is really good at distilling things down to its kind of most base level, and I think this is her absolute finest film, and it was just one I would have loved to have seen in the cinema. I just thought it was so special, and one that more than lived up to the hype, which I was worried it might just kind of fall a little bit short of in the run-up.
Has it turned you vegan? Did you fall in love with the cow enough that it means you're not going to have any more burgers or steaks?
I can't promise that, Dallas, but it's definitely made me want to have the oily buns that are kind of the go-to food in this film. So yeah, oily cakes, that's the one. So yeah, it's definitely not got the Okja vibe in terms of trying to turn you into something else, but it's maybe more sort of a film that makes you think capitalism, that's bad. So yeah, I'm going to rail against capitalism while still enjoying a burger.
Absolutely. Oily cakes, available from the A24 shop soon. Yeah, no, this is a film which I'm really looking forward to. I know it was my top pick for what I wanted the Glasgow Film Festival surprise film to be. I think it premiered at the Berlin Film Festival, so I thought there was an outside chance it might have made it to Glasgow, and it didn't. But I'm not going to wait for a UK release date, because there is none. It hasn't got a distributor here yet, so I'll be waiting a couple of weeks and then renting it from the US Apple iTunes Store. So I'm very much looking forward to that one, I think. So back to me, for me to release my number one film of the year, and it's a film which I saw last year. I had a very strong reaction to it, and happy to say my reaction was equally strong second time round when I managed to see it at the cinema, and then even on the third and fourth viewings when I watched it on Netflix as well, and that is the Josh and Benny Safdie film Uncut Gems, which stars Adam Sandler as Howard Ratner, a New York jeweler whose debts are mounting and angry creditors are closing in, and he risks everything in order for hope of staying afloat and alive. we both saw this at the London Film Festival. This was a surprise film, and Lee almost jumped up and screamed for joy when the introduction mentioned the fact that it was a couple of filmmakers had filmed an introduction for this film, and he knew it was Uncut Gems because this was the one we really wanted to see. It lived up to the hype. I'm not going to spoil it because there's probably some people still haven't seen it, but the ending made me jump out of my chair and scream. I just couldn't believe it, and it's a kind of film which you wonder, is it going to have the same impact second time round? But thankfully it does. It's still like the tensest, most uncomfortable viewing experience which I've had in cinema for such a long time. For anyone who is still moaning about Adam Sandler and his terrible comedies on Netflix, this will turn you around. He is just absolutely sensational in this. It features one of the best performances from a basketball player of all time. KG is just brilliant in it. It's got wonderful supporting turns from people who the Safdies just found on the street, like Julia Fox, and I think it's Keith David Richards or something like that, who plays the hired goon who is Howard's nemesis essentially, and it's just an incredible piece of filmmaking. The soundtrack is fantastic, and yeah, I love this film. I loved it so much that I even made my own board game during lockdown. That's how much I loved it, and I know you loved it, and I think it was your number 2. Was it, of 2019?
Yeah, it was thin margins between that and The Lighthouse, but I just felt The Lighthouse was just such a edged out. It was just such a unique vision that it was thin lines, but yeah, The Lighthouse just trumped out against Uncut Gems, but it was a last minute switch between the two.
Yeah, the two of them are almost equally good, and it could come down to basically which one you've sort of watched last, where you rank it and stuff like that. So yeah, we've done an entire episode on Uncut Gems, so and you can easily go back and listen to it to get our full views on that incredible viewing experience. But since that was on your 2019 list, I'm assuming you've got something maybe a little bit different for us at the top of your 2020 list. What have you gone for?
Yeah, so edging out into number 1 is Eliza Hittman's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. So it's about a pair of teenage girls in rural Pennsylvania who travel to New York to seek out medical help after an unintended pregnancy. So this was one of these films that at the kind of start of lockdown, the indie kind of films, there seemed to be a decision, a lot of them made of like, do we hold out hope or do we sort of put out onto VOD, charge a little bit of money and kind of hope for the best and find, a larger audience. And I think you see that in films like Never Really and things like The Assistant, where maybe we've got like a week or so at sort of the film house. It might have got a little bit of buzz and you probably would have not seen much follow through for a good few months. But something, when you see that these sorts of films probably got that larger audience, it seemed to kind of do really well in The Assistant as well. I know it's like the iTunes UK film of the week as well this week. These films got more attention than they had probably ever could have imagined that they would have received, sort of going through the conventional route. Now that's not to say these films shouldn't be shown in cinemas, it's just that they've managed to make a success of lockdown, and I still think I would love to see this film in the cinema. The central performance by Sydney Flanagan, I think it's the best performance of the year so far in terms of new films that I've seen, I should add. But yeah, it's one of these things that just boils your blood, the American kind of health system, and everyone knows all about how kind of unfair and unequal it is, but when you watch this film and see how it affects a young woman, pregnant, vulnerable, it's quite shocking and so on. And I would highly recommend people kind of check this film out. It's powerfully acted, fantastic direction, it's what indie cinema does, and it does incredibly well.
Yeah, no, I caught this one as well, and I had it in my top 10. And yeah, the central performance is absolutely stunning. It's a performance where it's someone who tries to put as brave a face on things as possible, but slowly is, like you say, is broken down by this system in America. And there's a scene where she has to answer a questionnaire before she's able to go through with a procedure, and it's one of the most sort of heartbreaking scenes I've watched this year. That was when it really sort of hammered home, because it's one of these indie films that, like you say, it would not have probably got a huge release and stuff, because you could potentially argue that not much actually really happens. She goes to tries to get an abortion here, can't, so she goes to New York and has to spend a couple of days there waiting to get it. And it's really just about following this one person, but thankfully the central performance lives up to it. And it's like the flip side of a film like Juno, which is sort of played very full of warmth and laughs and stuff like that. And this is a much more realistic version of what a young girl would be having to go through if faced with a situation like that, I think.
Yeah, it's such a shocker and so on, and it makes you kind of grateful. I mean, we certainly have our flaws here in the UK that, and I'm sure many women can probably relate to some of the things that go on here, but I'm so glad that we're not America when it comes to health and so on. And, hopefully that means that we've just got a few less kind of people going through the same situation that she goes through in this film than they do over there, and where it seems to be more common and a lot more partisan in terms of how people view sort of pregnancy, abortion, places like Planned Parenthood. It doesn't feel like it has that sort of political division here in the UK. It feels more like an outlier, thankfully, at the moment in terms of our politics.
Yeah, and it's no mistake that the sort of best films which have been released over here and in America on VOD recently have been this film and also The Assistant, which are all both written and directed by women, and they're films which need that sort of female perspective and that female voice to tell them properly, and it really sort of shines through. And I think, like you say, I think it's certainly in America, The Assistant is the film of the week. It's sort of 99 cents, and you can't go wrong with that. And I think Never Really, Sometimes, Always is actually quite cheap to rent in America as well. But you can also get it here in the UK, and they're both highly recommended by us. I think, Assistant would have been just outside the top 10 as well for me as well. So it's another recommendation. But that brings us to Alice. So only a couple of crossovers there actually. Well, there would have been a lot more if 2019 and 2020 had been combined together, I'm sure. But I think aside from the Five Bloods, Never Really, Always, and The Invisible Man, we've given you a lot of food for thought and a lot of some more lockdown viewing, since it's going to be carrying on for a few more weeks before we're able to get back into the cinemas. But we always like to recommend something else. We've given you some recommendations for films, but maybe we've got some recommendations for other things. So, Lee, what have you picked this week to give a shout out to our listeners?
Yeah, so on a cheery note, I've been really hooked on the Slow Burn David Duke podcast. So it talks about his sort of history rising through the Ku Klux Klan and his attempts to sort of get into American politics through sort of conventional elections. So a really disturbing listen, but a fantastic sort of series if you're out there sort of getting your daily fresh air and maybe want to kind of, escape one form of a horrible kind of world for another one. So, a really fantastic sort of mini-series that's going on at the moment on Slate.
Excellent. David Duke, I remember him well from Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman as the man who failed to realise that the guy on the phone that you were spoken to was a black man. So, yeah. But for me, I am actually going with a book recommendation this week. I work in the library, but I never have the time to read enough. But I've made a commitment to try and read a few new books during lockdown. And the first one, which I've picked, want to recommend is a memoir called Coming Undone by Terry White. Terry White might be familiar to film fans as the editor of Empire magazine, and this is her memoir, just sort of come out in the last week or so, and it's about a really sort of open book about her struggles with mental health and sort of abuse that she suffered in the past. It sort of starts off with her sort of talking about a suicide attempt and stuff, and it's really sort of interesting in the fact that she is talking about it's unflinching sort of look at her life. She moved to New York to work at Time Out and stuff like that. It seemed like she was living the dream life, but she was struggling with it, and it's just a fantastically, really well written book, and it's something that I think that even people not in the film industry and stuff, it's a fantastic memoir. It's probably the best memoir I've read since Michael J. Fox's Lucky Man, actually. A lot of these sort of celebrity biographies or something like that are sort of sometimes ghostwritten or people write with them, and it can become a bit of a puff piece. But she's completely bare and open and honest about her life and her struggles and stuff like that, and it's just a fantastic piece of writing, and I can't recommend it enough. So yeah, Coming Undone by Terry White.
Yeah, I read a brief extract from it in the Guardian, and yeah, really quite a shocking read and so on. So yeah, definitely one that will appeal to a lot of people, and yeah, it's good on her with the success, because it must have taken a lot of courage to write that.
Absolutely, and yeah, if you're thinking, oh, maybe I want to read that, like say Lee, he'd read it. There's an extract on The Guardian, which is available online, and yeah, it's just a small sort of taste of the book. But I think if you read that, you'll definitely want to read the full thing, so you can check that out online as well. But we're going to be back soon with some more films. I think we've been doing pretty well, actually, to be honest, Lee. We're 4 months into lockdown, and we've still been able to come up with an idea for a weekly episode of this podcast. I really thought we were going to struggle after a sort of month. Actually, no, to be honest, I thought after a month or two we'd actually be back in cinemas. I didn't think it was going to last this long. But yeah, I think we've been doing well so far for coming up with some content. So hopefully we'll be, of course, hopefully if we do get back to cinemas at the end of July, we'll have an episode about what it's like to go back to the cinemas after lockdown. Who knows if we'll get to review Tenet soon, but I don't know if there's any ideas that you would like to see us talk about, let us know on social media. And Lee, if people want to send you an idea, where can they find you?
Yeah, you better get in touch with our ideas, because we could be scraping the barrel soon, because it could be like our favourite YouTube stars or something like that. But no, you can find me on Twitter at @LeeHutchison_.
And you can find me on Twitter at DallasKing1138. And until next time, stay safe out there, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd